SpaceX's Starship could be landing on an Australian coast near you, assuming you're near Australia. This was news that came out of Reuters today. SpaceX is in discussions with the Australian government about landing a Starship in the future off the Australian coast, and that could lead to future business landing Starship on land or even launching Starship from Australia, which is super exciting for me personally because I have worked a long time in what's called point-to-point suborbital transportation. I'll get into that a bit later. What adds realism to this particular story is an agreement that was signed October 26th of last year called the TechnologySafeguard Agreement. That's a treaty signed between the US government and the Australian government. I'm reading from the website here, which I will link below. The agreement, upon entry into force, provides the legal and technical framework for U.S. space launches from Australian spaceports while ensuring proper handling of sensitive technology. And here I want to give props to Malcolm Davis, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, who was actually the first to talk about this that I saw at least. He wrote something about this, I'll link below, down in November of last year when it was just an idea in his mind. So now we have reporting that SpaceX is actually talking to the Australian government about landing a Starship, a future Starship, launching from Texas and landing it in Australia, initially off the coast of Australia in the ocean. Now, according to the Reuters article, it would require loosening of current export controls, which shouldn't be too big of a deal because the US and Australia are both part of the Five Eyes agreement. And so they do have that close relationship, especially when it comes to these kinds of treaties and military agreements. Depending on these test landings of Starship off the coast of Australia, they could lead to landing on land, just like how Starship is currently envisioned to land on land here in the United States. They could do a similar thing. They could build a tower in Australia on the land and land on land. Or it could even mean launching from Australia, because it's a logical conclusion that if you can land somewhere, you could also take off from there, or launch in this case. Where would this be happening? Well, we don't know the specifics, but there are 2 orbital launch sites, at least 2, let me know if there's more, that are approved in Australia. Gilmore Space launches from Abbot Point State Development Area in Queensland. And then Whalers Way Orbital Launch Complex on the South Australian Eyre Peninsula, which is operated by Southern Launch. I don't believe they've had an orbital launch yet from that location. So there's at least 2 locations that could be spaceports to be either landing near or in or launching from, or it could be completely different. It could be a totally different third location. And here's where we get into a bit of the science fiction, if you want to say, like, why do we care about this? This has been talked about for decades. It's called point-to-point suborbital transportation or point-to-point cargo delivery. It has been envisioned for a while that if you have a vehicle launching from one part of the world, going into space and landing on another part of the world, it could be as quick as 30 to 90 minutes. So if you're launching from the continental US right now on a typical commercial flight, air flight, and you're landing in Australia, it's somewhere around 14 to 20 hours. I would love to visit Australia someday, but 14 to 20 hours is how long it would take me to get there on a commercial flight. If you're launching from Starship, it could be as little as less than an hour. And that is what the rocket cargo program has been working on, is launching Starship and putting it down somewhere around the world in less than an hour. Rocket Cargo is a U.S. Space Force initiative that is run through the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory. To my knowledge, they've only been focused on SpaceX Starship. Let me know if you know that they've been focused on any other vehicles. But basically, the idea is that this is an ongoing study that they are looking into whether they can put cargo on a Starship, launch it from the United States, and land it somewhere else in the world. In 2022, the Air Force awarded SpaceX a $102 million contract over 5 years to look into rocket cargo specifically. And as much as some of you who have been in the space sector for a while, as long or longer than I have, you might be rolling your eyes at this whole concept. And apparently this is something that has been looked at in the past and been rejected. However, this recent study is showing promise. As recently as just a month ago, General Stephen Whiting, who is the commander of the U.S. Space Command, he gave a talk where he said, "We're excited about the work that the Air Force Research Lab has done on rocket cargo." And earlier this year, at a talk in January, forgive me, I'm going to mispronounce this name, but Gregory Spangers, the chief scientist of the rocket cargo program at the Air Force Research Laboratory, he gave a talk and he said, We can insert cargo transport as part of their regular launch rate progression and treat it just like another satellite in their flow, or have contracts in place where we can inject it into their flow. That's when we can bring the cost down by an order of magnitude and where it starts getting extremely attractive. And speaking of attractive, like I used to work for a company that wanted to do point-to-point suborbital transportation. In that case, they were using a spaceplane technology, and their idea was to have spaceports around the world. So they were based in Europe and I was based in Florida, and they had agreements in Florida, in Canada. They were putting together agreements in Latin America. I think they were working on another location in Europe and in Asia. And the idea was to have agreements all over the world so that there could be point to point. In this case, it would have been human transportation using suborbital space. Now, the company that I work for no longer is in business, so they failed. That's been the story of point-to-point suborbital transportation for a while, which usually focuses on human transportation and usually focuses on small numbers of human transportation. There has been no other vehicle that I'm aware of that is like Starship, that can carry vast amounts of cargo or high numbers of people in a suborbital transportation trip around the globe. In order to make things really scalable and profitable, you really do need to have those higher numbers, not just 7 people in a Virgin Galactic space plane, but 70 people. Think about the commercial airlines today and how many people they carry. There's a difference between the smaller planes that go regional and the large planes that go international, halfway across the world. That's not to say that there isn't room for smaller technology, smaller space planes that can start off small and grow. So we do have at least 2 suborbital space plane companies that I'm aware of that have put out news announcements recently. For example, New Frontier Aerospace. On July 23rd, they made an announcement that they had successfully performed a test firing of their engine on July 28th. And this engine is going to be part of a space plane called the Intercontinental Rocket Liner, which is a suborbital vehicle intended to carry 100 people on high-speed flights around the planet at hypersonic speeds. In looking into this company, they did discuss how they've been around a while and that funding is very limited for what they're trying to do, so their growth has been very slow, their progress has been very slow. Another company that I know has been doing some fun testing, shout out to Khaki, is Dawn Aerospace, based out of New Zealand. On July 11th, they got approvals from the New Zealand government to fly supersonic rocket plane tests for its Mark II Aurora spaceplane, and that's allowing it to go unlimited speeds and altitudes as high as 24,400 meters or 80,000 feet, with an ultimate goal of Mark II Aurora flying up to 100 kilometers. That's that von Karman line for suborbital cargo and research. There are a few other companies out there that are doing suborbital. I mentioned Virgin Galactic. When they started the company a while ago, did mention that they could possibly do suborbital transportation. And in fact, they've talked, Virgin Orbit, the spin-off company, talked to spaceports around the world to try to set up that point-to-point transportation. Virgin Orbit went bankrupt. Virgin Galactic has long abandoned their plans to do point-to-point suborbital transportation. They've really been focused more on space tourism. Blue Origin is another one that's doing suborbital right now. I don't believe they have any plans to do point-to-point transportation suborbitally. They've got much bigger plans with Orbital Rocket New Glenn and Orbital Reef and Blue Moon and a whole load of other things that they're working on. And then there are some other companies that I don't even know if are still in existence, I'll be honest, that have been working on suborbital point-to-point transportation. None of them have the big contracts and the attention of the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Defense, which is where a lot of this money is going to come from for initial development, because if the military wants the ability to get cargo very quickly around the world, and Starship is what they've identified as the vehicle to possibly be able to do that. It makes sense to start with Australia. It's a friendly allied country. There's a whole lot of empty land and open ocean. My guess is that these are tests that once operational, it's not like the military is going to be spending a ton of money to send cargo very quickly to Australia, but perhaps those Australian tests will enable the capability to send cargo very quickly elsewhere in the world where the U.S. military deems necessary. And who knows where that could lead? It could also lead to transportation of troops. We just really don't know where this technology is going to go. But I personally find it fun that we're partnering more with Australia and we're seeing more of the Australian space industry growing. And so I hope that these talks come to fruition and that there is a Starship landing in the future. We recently got word from Elon Musk that that the next Starship test flight will be trying to capture the rocket booster with the chopsticks on the tower. Really looking forward to that. If you are curious as to why SpaceX's Starship absolutely needs to work for NASA, watch this video. I covered that in depth.